The Mojave sky bled bruise purple and feverish orange as the sun surrendered, devoured by the moon's passage. A predatory stillness fell the air, chilling unnaturally. Within the thick adobe walls of the Vasquez hacienda, a monument to wealth rested from the resisting earth. Isabella gasped a sharp guttural sound moments before. Through the heavy door slightly ajar, she'd heard the raised voices, her husband Ricardo arguing fiercely with his cousin Mateo in the corridor. Something about disputed boundaries near the old forbidden grounds, Mateo's tone laced with a cold avarice that chilled her more than the encroaching twilight. Ricardo had cut him off sharply, his voice strained, dismissing Mateo's veiled threats. But the unease lingered like bitter dust. Now, it wasn't just labor. A sudden violent tremor shook the very foundations, rattling timbers, making the gilded crucifix on the wall perform a grotesque dance. Outside her window, the sand itself rippled like water disturbed by something vast moving beneath. It was into this unholy twilight, under the sign of a world shuddering, suspended and tainted by familial discord, that the child was born. And Isabella, pale and slick with sweat, her dark hair plastered to her temples, clutched the impossibly small infant. Her eyes, usually soft pools, blazed now, with fierce primal love, mixed with nascent terror, intensified by the earlier confrontation. Skin like bleached bone found deep underground. A whisper of hair like spun moonlight, catching the eclipse's eerie glow, and delicate features framed by lashes of startling, unnatural silver. When the baby's eyes fluttered open, Isabella's breath hitched, not the familiar grounding brown of the Vasquez line, but shimmering luminous crimson, holding an unnerving awareness that seemed far older than moments. A sharp intake of breath escaped her, awe fighting a dread colder than the desert night. This child, conceived under circumstances clouded by Ricardo's recent abrupt silences following clashes with Mateo, and born during a violent earth shudder accompanying the eclipse, felt less like a blessing and more like a vulnerability, a focal point for the darkness gathering at the edges of their lives. Outside the heavy oak door, the whispers had already turned venomous, fueled perhaps by Mateo's insidious suggestions earlier. The Vasquez family, a dynasty forged in ruthless land acquisition, and an ambition as stark as the sun-bleached skulls dotting the landscape, saw no miracle. They saw disruption, abomination, and Albino, a ghost child vomited forth by the shadowed sun and trembling earth. Old Maria, the midwife, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and grim piety, traced frantic crosses in the air, muttering prayers against mal de ojo and things far older, her knuckles white. Ricardo Vasquez, Isabella's husband, a man whose authority was carved onto his face by sun, wind, and command, stared at his daughter, disbelief warred with a deep, soul-shaking unease exacerbated by the memory of Mateo's chilling words just moments ago. This deviation, this flaw. It was a crack in the formidable Vasquez armor tinder for the superstitious fires that smoldered beneath the surface of the nearby town, ready to rage. A daughter, he announced, his voice clipped, devoid of warmth, addressing the family members gathered like vultures sensing weakness. Their faces were a strained gallery of forced smiles, overlaying poorly concealed revulsion. Cousins, aunts, uncles, eyes darted to the cradle, then skittered away, as if the sight itself were infectious, poisoning the bloodline. Mateo, Ricardo's younger cousin, whose restless ambition burned coolly behind watchful eyes, stepped forward, cloaking avarice in the guise of grave concern. His voice pitched low, but carrying snake through the tense silence. Ricardo, forgive my presumption, but this is profoundly unsettling. The timing, the eclipse, the very earth groaning. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy, perhaps recalling their earlier argument and her striking appearance. He met Ricardo's gaze directly. The old ones, the desert folk our grandfathers displaced, had legends tied to eclipses like this. Dark tales concerning the ground here, especially near those disputed borders. They spoke of bargains made of things awakened by cosmic disturbances. Ricardo cut him off with a glare that could silence thunder. But the poison was already seeping. Isabella, overhearing, despite the thick door, fiercely whispered the name Esperanza, hope, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. But hope felt like a fluttering bird in a tightening fist. Isabella was his wife. This, his child. The Vasquez name was an impenetrable fortress, wasn't it? He clung to that belief, a man whistling past a graveyard where he didn't realize he was already standing in. The first death came swiftly with brutal theatricality. Ricardo, who prided himself on mastering the Mojave, treating it as his personal fiefdom, vanished. Days later, a patrol led by Sheriff Brody, suspiciously prompt, some later whispered, found him slumped against a weathered rock formation miles from the hacienda, but chillingly close to the disputed ancient grounds bordering their property, the very land he and Mateo had argued over. His face was a mask of ultimate terror, eyes, wide mouth agape, frozen mid-scream. His mouth, throat, and lungs were packed solid with fine coppery sand. Sand found only near those forbidden grounds, rumored to have once soaked up sacrificial blood. No tracks led away, no signs of struggle marred the scene. Only the vast, indifferent silence of the wilderness that seemed to mock his mastery. Sheriff Brody ruled it a bizarre, inexplicable accident. Perhaps a freak sandstorm inhalation case, closed with notable swiftness. Isabella shattered grief, consuming her, leaving her adrift in a sea of sudden, terrifying vulnerability. The whispers became outright accusations, knives twisted in her fresh wound. The child they hissed behind cupped hands, the ghost child calls its unnatural kin. Isabella retreated, clinging to Esperanza, her love the only anchor in the storm. She forced herself to see only innocence. In the infant's unnervingly calm red gaze, felt only the helpless warmth of a tiny hand grasping her finger. But the family, relentlessly prodded by Mateo's insidious interpretations of each tragedy, saw only a curse made manifest. Elena, Ricardo's mother, the formidable matriarch, whose fierce piety was matched only by her dynastic pride, retreated into ever deeper consultations within her private prayer tent, seeking divine intervention or perhaps making desperate whispered bargains of her own. The scent of sage hanging around the tent grew thick, cloying, mixed with something else. Ozone burnt metal. Then one starless night, smoke billowed thick and acrid. Men rushed towards the remote tent. It was an inferno consuming Elena utterly. The air heavy with burning herbs and the unmistakable sickeningly sweet smell of roasting flesh, punctuated by sharp pops like exploding marrow. Sheriff Brody, arriving later, ruled it a tragic accident. A tipped brazier, perhaps, 2 deaths, grotesque, unholy. Convenient fear metastasized into panicked certainty. The remaining elders huddled like frightened quail. Then came Jorge, Uncle Jorge, whose connection with horses bordered on the supernatural, whose gentle murmur could calm the most terrified Mustang. He was found in his own central corral, not merely trampled, but pulverized into a bloody ruin, churned into the dust by the very stallions he had raised from trembling foals. The horses stood over his remains, trembling violently. Eyes rolling white, lathered in sweat, snorting not in aggression, but in sheer, unadulterated terror. As if they had battled something invisible and demonic within the confines of the rails, Brody's investigation was cursory. Horse panic tragic. His report stated flatly, the unnatural pattern was undeniable. Something predatory was stalking the Vasquez lineage, something swift, inescapable, and seemingly targeting their defining strengths before obliterating them. Mateo seized his moment, sculpting fear like clay. He was no longer suggesting, he was declaring. He became the grim prophet of their terror. Weaving a coherent, damning narrative, the cursed child, an unholy conduit born under an ill-omened eclipse. that had thinly veiled the barrier between worlds, drawing ancient malice towards them. He spoke softly, persuasively, in shadowed corners of the hacienda of the vast ranch lands Esperanza, through these tragic necessities, now stood to inherit. He painted visions of imminent ruin and the curse spreading like rot, consuming their entire legacy. She is not Vasquez blood. He whispered, his eyes glittering like obsidian shards in the lamplight, reflecting the greed gnawing at his soul. She is an aberration, a nexus for the darkness tied to this land, for the family's survival, for the sanctity of our heritage. The source, the infection, must be cauterized, cleansed. The word hung heavy with unspoken violence. The remaining relatives, gutted by grief, paralyzed by superstitious dread, and seduced by the whispered promise of regaining control over the consolidated inheritance, surrendered their reason. Isabella, locked away in her mourning, fiercely, blindly protective, became the final obstacle. Their gazes toward her hardened, losing all trace of kinship. Whispered conferences occurred deep in the night, alliances forged in fear and avarice. No direct murder, not on their hands. The desert, ancient and impersonal, would be their instrument. Under the cold, uncaring glare of a waning crescent moon, they came for the child. Isabella, roused by a mother's instinct, fought like a she-wolf, trapped her screams ripping through the sprawling hacienda, finding no friendly ear, only the chilling echo from indifferent adobe walls. Mateo directed with icy precision, his face a mask as his men overpowered her. Leaving her sobbing, bleeding from scratches on the cold floor, they locked her away, pushing laudanum on her, muffling her grief into drugged silence. Esperanza, barely weeks old, was wrenched from warmth and safety, wrapped not in comforting swaddling, but in a stark white burial shroud. A premature symbol of their intent, Mateo himself, pulling on heavy riding gloves, carried the small, disturbingly quiet bundle out into the freezing desert night. He rode further than necessary, deep into the heart of the Mojave, to a desolate stretch where the canyons twisted like tortured souls. And the only sound was the mournful call of coyotes. There, beneath indifferent, faraway stars, he dismounted, placed the shrouded infant on the chilling sand, remounted, spurred his horse into a gallop, and never looked back, convinced he had purged the family curse and secured his rightful place. The silence left behind felt charged, waiting. He couldn't have been more catastrophically mistaken. The desert, however, pulses with hidden life. It breathes, it remembers ancient debts, and sometimes, against all odds, it offers sanctuary. Miles away, moving with the silence of smoke across the moonlit mesas, Nyalani, an Apache herbalist and wise woman, followed paths known only to her people, etched by centuries onto the land's memory. Grief for her husband, taken by the Sickies Wigai. White man's fever had carved lines of resilience onto her face, hardening but not breaking her spirit. She carried the deep knowledge of the desert's secrets, its cures, its dangers, her connection to the land intuitive and profound. Returning from a solitary journey to gather rare moonbloom herbs from a sacred hidden spring, a sound impossibly fragile against the vastness snagged her attention. An infant's cry, thin, reedy, a desperate thread of life resisting the immense silence. Caution learned through hardship, warred with deep-seated compassion. The desert whispered deceptions, but this cry held a persistent, heart-wrenching tenacity. Following the sound, her senses' sharp eyes scanning the moon-washed terrain, she moved with the predatory grace of her ancestors. And then she saw it, a stark white anomaly against the dark, shadowed earth, a burial shroud. Drawing closer, the cries softened to faint whimpers. She knelt, her movements fluid, deliberate. Gently, reverently, she parted the ominous white folds. The infant blinked up at her pale skin, almost translucent in the ethereal moonlight. Silver lashes stark against the delicate face. The luminous red eyes, wide and strangely calm, held no discernible fear, only an ancient, unnerving awareness. Naalani felt a powerful jolt, not of fear, but of profound spiritual recognition. Diabae, marked by spirit profoundly. So the settlers steeped in their narrow fears would spew devil spawn. Nyalani rooted in the deeper wisdom of her people, the ND. The people saw something else entirely. She saw a child touched, consecrated even by forces beyond human ken. The eclipse, the moon, perhaps the wounded restless earth itself, seeking a different kind of balance. This was not an ending cast aside, but a beginning offered precarious and precious. The desert hadn't claimed her. It seemed to have presented her. With the quiet, unshakable strength that defined her, Nalani gathered the baby into her arms, sensing warmth, safety, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit. The infant quieted instantly, nuzzling against her worn buckskin vest. Nalani scanned the ground, reading the story left behind. Deep hoof prints of a single hard-ridden horse heading back towards the sprawling Vasquez lands. She knew of the family, their staggering wealth, their legendary arrogance, their history stained by the displacement of others. Cold certainty settled in her stomach like ice. An act of profound cruelty, born of superstitious fear and naked greed. She wrapped the baby securely in her own warm blanket, murmuring soft Apache words of comfort, protection, and belonging. The desert winds sighed around them, a lonely lullaby, carrying away the scent of abandonment, replacing it with the faint, clean fragrance of juniper and the promise of sanctuary. Nyalani turned her back resolutely on the Vasquez Empire and carried the child towards the hidden protective canyons where her people lived, towards a new life. A new name under the guardianship of the Apache. Back at the Vasquez hacienda, a heavy, suffocating silence descended, punctuated only by Isabella's muffled weeping from her locked room. Kept heavily sedated, she was fed the lie Esperanza. Frail from the start, had succumbed to a sudden lung fever, her weak constitution unable to withstand the harsh desert air. A tiny, tragically empty grave was dug in the family plot. A simple stone hastily carved read, Esperanza Vasquez, born and died under the eclipse. Mateo faced a mask of solemn hypocrisy, delivered a moving eulogy, praising the infant's tragically brief, ethereal existence. He moved with chilling speed to consolidate his power, the compliant town doctor pocket significantly heavier with Vasquez. Silver signed the death certificate without question. Sheriff Brody, present at the sparse funeral, offered empty condolences, his eyes oddly watchful, his ambition already calculating, subtly aligning with Mateo's assent. Land deeds were meticulously reviewed. Legal documents subtly altered by a lawyer deeply indebted to Mateo. A lawyer who subsequently drove his carriage off a cliff near Rattlesnake Point, ruled a tragic accident by Brody despite clear skies, a straight road, and rumors of the lawyer having recently threatened to expose Mateo. The vast Vasquez ranch, its resources, its power now flowed unimpeded into Mateo's controlling hands, and the perceived curse was purged, the inheritance brutally secured. But the desert holds its secrets tightly, and whispers travel further than horsemen on the wind. Rumors began to surface in the nearby town, fragmented tales carried by intrepid traders and trappers, who sometimes ventured near the elusive Apache territories. Stories of a pale-skinned child thriving among the natives, a girl with hair like spun moonlight and eyes that shone like captured embers. Istas, they called her Snow. Mateo dismissed them publicly as drunken campfire fantasies, baseless superstition, yet a cold sliver of undiluted fear lodged itself deep beneath his breastbone, refusing to dissolve. He couldn't afford whispers. He increased patrols along the ranch, borders, his orders becoming sharper, his temper flaring unpredictably. He craved absolute certainty, the kind only silence provides. Meanwhile, deep within the hidden sanctuary of the Apache stronghold, the child flourished. Nyalani had named her Istas for her pale beauty. But as she grew, displaying a fierce spirit, uncanny resilience, and an almost unsettling affinity for the land, the warriors began affectionately calling her Sophie, a name derived from wisdom. In another tongue, one that somehow stuck bridging the two worlds she unknowingly embodied. She was bathed in the warmth of community, a stark, healing contrast to the cold, calculating ambition of her birth family. Nyalani was her mother in every sense that mattered patiently, teaching her the intricate ways of the desert. The language of plants, the stories hidden in animal tracks, the ancient legends of their people, the disciplined focus of a warrior. Sophie learned to move through the treacherous canyons with ghost-like silence, to draw strength from the sun-baked earth, to read the subtle narratives of the sky. Her unusual appearance, initially a source of intense curiosity, slowly became accepted, even revered by some elders who saw the potent spiritual markings Nyalani had recognized at first sight. She was startlingly quick, both physically and mentally. Her senses, especially hearing and a peculiar sensitivity to vibrations in the ground, unnaturally acute. She learned to fight not with malice, but with lethal, focused intensity, defending herself and those she loved. She carried the quiet, enduring strength of Nyalani, the watchful eyes of the desert hawk. Yet unanswered questions shadowed her heart like passing clouds. She knew she was different beyond just appearance. Fragments of lullabies, in a language she didn't speak, surfaced in dreams. Hazy, tear-streaked images of a pale woman's face filled with anguish. Nyalani answered her questions, gently, truthfully, withholding only the most brutal details until she was ready. She spoke of being found abandoned by those driven by fear and greed, saved by the desert and the compassion of the people. She spoke of the cruelty of some white men obsessed with gold and power, fearful of anything they didn't understand. She instilled in Sophie a deep, unwavering sense of justice, a reverence for truth, and the profound understanding that true strength lay not in dominance, but in balance and respect for all life. As Sophie blossomed into a young woman, her skills honed sharp as obsidian, her spirit strong as the ancient junipers, her connection to the land growing deeper. Stranger, the whispers from the outside world grew louder, more specific, carrying undeniable weight. A trusted trader known for his discretion and long-standing peaceful dealings with the Apache brought Nyalani grave news, confirming earlier rumors. He spoke of the Vasquez ranch, now an empire ruled solely by Mateo's iron fist. He spoke of the immense wealth accumulated through ruthless efficiency, but also of a persistent undercurrent of fear in the nearby town. And he spoke of recent, unsettling disappearances. Men who had once been close to Mateo. Men who might have held lingering knowledge about the tumultuous events surrounding Ricardo's succession and the baby's alleged death. The former head wrangler, who had been loyal to Jorge and present soon after his death, vanished without a trace during a routine supply run. Last seen arguing with Mateo's foreman. The compliant town doctor hadn't just retired. He and his family had disappeared overnight after receiving a large, mysterious sum of money traced back to Mateo's accounts just days after expressing anxieties to his wife about the old Vasquez business. Sheriff Brody, while outwardly maintaining order, seemed to benefit significantly his influence and personal wealth, growing disproportionately, often turning a conveniently blind eye to Mateo's harsher methods. Mateo, it seemed, was meticulously, ruthlessly pruning loose ends, haunted by the ghost he thought he had permanently buried in the desert sand. The pattern echoed the swift, convenient deaths that had originally cleared his path to power. Nyalani watched Sophie absorb this news, saw the flint ignite behind the luminous red gaze, saw the quiet, steely determination that mirrored her own resolve, hardened over years of survival. The time had irrevocably come. Sitting by the crackling fire under a vast canopy of indifferent stars, Nyalani recounted the entire story. The violent eclipse birth, accompanied by earth tremors, and the earlier argument between Ricardo and Mateo. The fearful relatives whispering curse, the string of horrifyingly unnatural deaths, Mateo's calculated manipulation of their terror. The greed-driven plot, the heartless abandonment, the forged certificates, Sheriff Brody's suspicious proximity and inaction. The stolen inheritance built on lies and blood. She spoke not to incite vengeance, but to reveal the whole, unvarnished truth, the bedrock upon which Sophie's future actions must be built. Sophie listened, her face pale, but resolute. In the flickering firelight, the fragmented dreams, the pervasive sense of otherness, the disturbing sensitivity to the land, the whispered rumors. It all clicked into place, forming a horrifying, heartbreaking mosaic. Waves of grief washed over her. For the mother whose anguished face haunted her dreams, for the father, struck down likely not just by superstition, but by Mateo's ambition for the family that had cast her out like diseased refuse. But beneath the grief surged a cold, clear, powerful anger, honed and tempered by Nailani's lifelong teachings. It was not chaotic hatred, but a focused, righteous demand for reckoning for justice. Long overdue, she owed it to her parents, to the stolen life represented by the name Esperanza, and to the people who had saved and raised her. She also felt an increasingly strong, almost magnetic pull towards the Vasquez land itself. A place unseen, yet deeply resonant within her blood and bones, a place that felt incomplete, wounded, violated. Nailani watched her closely, recognizing the shift. They believed you were a cursed child. They were catastrophically wrong. You survived the desert that should have killed you. You were raised and strengthened by the people you carry the spirit of both within you. What they truly fear is not a curse, but the undeniable truth you represent. Remember, justice seeks balance, restores harmony. Revenge only burns itself and everything around it to ash. Sophie nodded, understanding dawning in her luminous eyes, settling the turmoil within her. I will go back, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of unshakable conviction. Not for the land, not for the wealth alone, but for the truth, for my mother, Isabella, for my father, Ricardo, for all those Mateo silenced to build his empire on their graves, and for whatever darkness they disturbed. A faint tremor, felt only by her, and perhaps Nailani ran through the ground beneath the fire pit. A low sigh from the deep earth. Nailani placed a weathered hand on Sophie's shoulder. You will not walk this path alone. Your journey is yours to lead, but your people, the Undi, stand with you unseen but present. Preparations began not for open war, but for a careful, deliberate, strategic return. Sophie trained with renewed focus, pushing her skills in tracking stealth desert survival and hand-to-hand defense to their peak. The Apache elders offered counsel, sharing nuanced knowledge of the town dynamics, the layout of the ranch acquired through generations of observation, the known habits and weaknesses of the Vasquez dynasty, and its current lord and Brody's deepening entanglement. Scouts moving like desert foxes observed the ranch from hidden vantage points, gathering intelligence on patrols, routines, guard placements, Mateo's movements, his increasingly volatile temper, and Brody's frequent hushed meetings with him. Sophie studied maps drawn meticulously in the sand, memorizing the contours of the land. She was born to inherit the land that seemed to call to her with a growing urgency. As she prepared, the nagging sense of unease, the feeling unrelated to Mateo or Brody, intensified. Dreams became more vivid, more disturbing. Visions of swirling dust devils coalescing into indistinct forms, whispers rising from cracks in the earth, a vast, coiled darkness pulsing deep beneath the Vasquez land, ancient, hungry, and deeply disturbed. She spoke of it urgently to Nailani, who listened with growing gravity, her brow furrowed. The land remembers. Nailani reiterated cryptically, her eyes clouded. The first Vasquez took much shedding blood, breaking faith with the spirit of the place. They built their foundations over something that demanded respect, perhaps reverence. Their greed and violence may have deeper roots and far darker consequences than mere silver and gold. the ever-watchful child. Mateo is a viper, and Brody a scorpion hiding in his shadow. But the true danger may lie coiled in the earth beneath their feet, awakened by generations of sin. And perhaps by your return. The time arrived. Under the shroud of a moonless, star-drenched night, Sophie, accompanied by Clin, a warrior renowned for his silence and speed, and 3 other hand-picked ND chosen by Nalani for their exceptional skills and unwavering loyalty, began the journey back towards the world that had birthed and brutally rejected her. She wore simple, durable Apache clothing, blending seamlessly with the shadows and scrub. Her pale hair was tightly bound, hidden under a dark wrap, her striking eyes holding a calm, terrifyingly focused resolve. She was no longer just Esperanza, the cursed infant, nor solely Istas, the Apache foundling, nor merely Sophie, the adopted daughter. She was a synthesis of all 3, returning to reclaim not just an inheritance, but her fractured identity, and to confront the multifaceted darkness, both human and possibly something far more ancient and elemental, festering at the heart of the Vasquez legacy. The desert air, usually clean and sharp, now seemed tainted, smelling faintly of turned earth and impending violent change. The reckoning was about to begin. Sophie and her companions moved like ghosts through the familiar yet alien landscape surrounding the Vasquez ranch. The air here felt palpably different, heavier, charged with a tense, almost buzzing energy that prickled her skin, the ground beneath humming faintly, a dissonant chord, vibrating up through the soles of her moccasins. It was the feeling Naalani had warned her about, amplified, resonant. She compartmentalized the unease, focusing reconnaissance first. They established a hidden camp in a jumble of rocky outcrops overlooking the sprawling hacienda, dedicating days to observing the rhythm of Mateo's fear-driven empire. Vast herds irrigated fields stolen from the desert scores of ranch hands, moving with practiced fearful efficiency under the watchful eyes of Mateo's brutal foreman. An undercurrent of tension radiated outwards. Men rode heavily armed conversations, clipped, avoiding Mateo's earshot, and Brody's 2 frequent patrols. Mateo ruled like a paranoid monarch, his face leaner, harder lines of paranoia etched around constantly shifting eyes. He rarely smiled, barking orders, perpetually sweeping his gaze across his domain. Sophie watched him through Naalani's spyglass, feeling a cold recognition of the architect of her abandonment, yet tempered by Naalani's counsel, justice not revenge. They documented patrol routes, noted vulnerabilities, marked shift changes, identified key personnel. The sycophantic foreman, the brutal head wrangler, Mateo's ever-present bodyguards, and Brody's disturbingly regular inspections. They mapped the house layout, stables, bunkhouse, the crucial well-mentioned and whispered legends. Sophie's Apache training yielded details others missed. A loose board on a back porch, a guard's habitual mescal. Break the exact path Mateo took on evening inspections, Brody's pattern of arriving after any trouble. One evening, cloaked in twilight, Sophie crept towards the small, neglected family graveyard. She found the weathered stone, Esperanza Vasquez, born and died under the eclipse. Kneeling hidden, she traced the false letters, a painful connection to the infant she was. This lie would end as she watched Mateo approached alone. He stopped before the small marker, stood motionless, then turned abruptly, stumbling heavily against his father's older headstone. He cursed viciously, rubbing his ankle, limping away. A fleeting moment of awkward vulnerability. He was just a man ruled by fear and greed. The next phase, infiltrate the town. Disguised in dusty traveler's clothes, wide-brimmed hat shadowing her features, Sophie rode in with Clin, posing as a hand-seeking work. The town felt suffocated by Vasquez influence. Dusty street saloon, nervous general store owner Brody's office radiating complicity. Sophie's eyes drew glances, deflected by her quiet demeanor and Clin's presence. Listening in the saloon and store, they learned Mateo was feared for his temper and ruthlessness. Brody was quietly known as Mateo's man, though his own wealth seemed to grow faster than simple complicity explained. The doctor who'd signed the certificate had retired abruptly. The lawyer who altered deeds was dead. Brody's suicide ruling still fueled hushed doubts, loose ends chillingly tied. But darker whispers persisted, unsettling disappearances of those who crossed Mateo. Strange occurrences at the ranch. Cattle dead without cause, crops withering, low groaning noises at night, nervously attributed to wind, but hinting at more. The subterranean thrumming Sophie felt was manifesting. Sophie sought Elias Thorne, the retired blacksmith known for independence and integrity. Under pretext of repairing an Apache tool, she carefully engaged him. Elias was shrewd, cautious. His opinion of Mateo lay in veiled words about the fear holding the town hostage. When Sophie carefully probed about the old deaths, the Eclipse baby Elias's face tightened. Some wounds folks learned not to poke. He grunted, hitting the anvil hard. Bad luck follows talk. Just before she left, he pressed a folded paper into her hand, avoiding her gaze. Old Man Hemlock, he muttered over the forge's roar. Hermit Dragoon Foothills keeps clear of Mateo and Brody, remembers things others forget. Be damned careful. Hemlock, a recluse. Finding his hidden cabin took 2 arduous days, wary, shotgun ready. He peered out, recognizing Clin's Apache bearing. Sensing Sophie's quiet resolve, he grudgingly let them in. He remembered everything with startling clarity. The Eclipse, fearful whispers, Ricardo, hard, ambitious, not twisted like Mateo. The unnatural deaths, Ricardo's sandy suffocation, Elena's inferno. Jorge's trampling the infant's muted funeral. Brody's oddly detached investigations. Then, unprompted, he spoke of the land. Ain't natural, that patch, he rasped, stirring pungent stew. First, Vasquez took the heart of it, drove off older folk, worshipped the ground, sacred-like. Said something powerful slept beneath, didn't like being disturbed. Old Vasquez wanted water grazing, built his damn hacienda right atop their holy ground. He spat. Maybe them first deaths weren't all Mateo. Maybe the land itself started collecting overdue debts. In Almer, Hemlock's words resonated, aligning with Sophie's senses, Nalani's warnings, not just Mateo's greed upon tragedy. It stemmed from the violent desecration at the Fortune's foundation. Hemlock grimly confirmed recent disappearances, and the doctor vanished after a visit from Mateo's thugs. The lawyer's suicide note rumored a forgery. He provided names, dates, overheard conversations, hushed by Brody. Brody plays dumb, but he ain't. Hemlock added, his eyes sharp. Saw him once years back prowling near Ricardo's death site before the body was officially found. Something ain't right about that man. He warned them again. Mateo and Brody got paid eyes everywhere. Best be moving. Returning stealthily, Sophie shared Hemlock's account with Nalani, who had joined them. Nalani grew grave hearing about the displaced people, the sleeping power, and Hemlock's suspicion of Brody. The earth remembers, she said softly. The grandfather's violence woke something Mateo's cruelty fed it. Brody? If he's involved, he's playing with fire far hotter than Mateo understands. This runs deeper, is more dangerous. Exposing them is vital. But tread like the hawk on thin ice. Disturbing Mateo further might fully awaken what slumbers, and its indiscriminate wrath could consume all. The plan crystallized now, accounting for Brody, and the elemental threat relying on town authorities was suicide. They needed undeniable proof linking Mateo and potentially Brody to the conspiracy disappearances and cover-ups. And they needed to expose it publicly, dramatically. The confrontation had to encompass all their crimes, perhaps shining light on the original sin. Their target, Mateo's private study infiltration, required Apache's skills pushed to the limit. They plotted the infiltration for Mateo's confirmed 3-day absence, overseeing a distant cattle drive. Sophie, agile and preternaturally quiet, would enter with Klin. Other Apache warriors would melt into the hills, ready for subtle diversions if needed. A brush fire spooked horses, drawing patrols away. The chosen night was pitch black. Moonless wind, moaning eerily, dark clothes. Charcoal-smudged faces, Sophie and Klin moved like wraiths, bypassing outer patrols easily. Klin boosted Sophie to the shadowed second-floor balcony, leading to a seldom-used guest room. Docker unlocked. Mateo's arrogance inside the house felt opulent, cold. Sterile dust motes danced. They moved like whispers, senses screamingly alert Klin. A silent shadow. Floorboards creaked like thunder. Reaching Mateo's study locked heavy oak. Klin knelt, producing thin tools. With surgeon-like precision, he worked the complex lock. Minutes stretched, a soft click. They slipped inside. The study reeked of stale cigars, leather, and faintly decay. Moonlight illuminated a massive desk, groaning shelves, maps. Sophie went to the desk. Fingers exploring methodically, ledgers, accounts, letters. Klin moved silently, checking shelves, tapping walls. Time ticked like hammer blows. Bottom right drawer. A false bottom. Sophie pried it up beneath a heavy locked metal strongbox. Klin worked the formidable lock, agonizing minutes. Another soft click. Inside, land deeds, financials, and the treasures. The faded letter detailing the plan to abandon Esperanza, signed by Mateo and deceased relatives. Notes outlining payments to the doctor and initial smaller payments to Sheriff Brody. A crudely forged draft of the lawyer's suicide note. And tucked beneath a small, worn, leather-bound diary, Sophie's breath caught. Not Mateo's hand, older, ornate, shaky. Her grandfather's, Ricardo's father, the founder. Early entries boasted of conquest, dismissal of superstitions, then the shift, vivid nightmares, trembling ground. Beneath the hacienda, unsettling carved artifacts, obsidian blades, bone amulets found digging the first deep well near the site. Hemlock described. Growing unease, feeling watched by the land, certainty their prosperity had a terrible cost. That something ancient, powerful, inimical lay buried, disturbed. Mounting fear not of curses, but tangible terrestrial rage. Later entries chronicled desperate attempts to appease this power. Frantic letters copies included, urged Ricardo to perform, placating rituals, show respect, even abandon the troublesome section. Ricardo contemptuously refused. The final pages, frantic, almost incoherent, spoke of shadows coalescing underground, palpable hunger, and one horrifying underlined sentence. Perhaps only renewed sacrifice upon the desecrated ground can soothe its long slumber. The blood spilled when we took the land was insufficient. The founder knew he'd considered feeding it. A sudden violent tremor shook the house stronger than before. Dust rained downstairs, boots pounded, voices shouted, "Mateo, back early, impossible, he knows." Sophie breathed, shoving the documents, abandonment letter, payment notes, forgery draft, the diary, into her tunic pouch. Or something brought him back. They had to get out now. Klin swiftly closed and locked the box, replaced the false bottom. They slipped out just as lanterns flared downstairs and men pounded up the main staircase. Mateo barking furious orders, voice tight with rage, detected. Or was the land itself stirring, desperate speed towards the balcony, boots down the adjacent corridor? They ducked behind a heavy tapestry, just as two armed guards stormed past towards the study. Hair's breadth escape, reaching the balcony. Klin secured a rope. Sophie slid down landing silently. Klin followed, pulling the rope. Out. But as they moved rapidly away, melting into shadows near the outer wall, the ground gave a distinct, sickening lurch. More localized, deliberate. A low guttural groan rose from the earth, echoing her nightmares. From the old well's direction, an eerie phosphorescent green light flickered, pulsed, illuminating the cloud undersides, then vanished. The air grew colder, sharp, metallic scent, like unearthed or ancient decay. This was real Mateo's return, the steady disturbance their presence, stirring the slumbering power closer to wakefulness. Suddenly from the darkness near the stable figures emerged. Two of Mateo's guards, alerted perhaps by the tremor or a flicker of movement. "Hey, who's there?" A rifle cracked the bullet, whining past Sophie's ear, ricocheting off the adobe wall. "Go," Clint hissed, shoving her towards the denser shadows. They sprinted, weaving through outbuildings, the guards pursuing, shouting, firing sporadically. The planned stealthy retreat dissolved into desperate flight. Sophie's Apache training kicked in. Swift, silent movement, using every shadow, every obstacle, Clint drew fire. Leading one guard off on a false trail towards the rocky boundary, Sophie ducked behind a water trough as the second guard rounded the corner. He raised his rifle, but a sudden, violent tremor shook the ground directly beneath him. He yelled, losing balance, falling heavily, as a narrow fissure momentarily gaped open, then closed like a hungry mouth. He lay stunned as Sophie melted into the moonless scrub beyond the hacienda walls, heart pounding not just from exertion, but from the tangible, terrifying intervention of the land itself. She regrouped with Clint and the waiting warriors minutes later, breathless, the proof secured, but the escape highlighting the volatile unpredictability of their true adversary. The earth beneath the Vasquez ranch was awake, angry, possessing a hunger and perhaps a chillingly selective aim. The next morning, orchestrated chaos, the disturbed study sent Mateo into paranoid fury. He savaged guards, threatened hands, fear palpable. He suspected spies, rivals, vengeful spirits. The tremors added to the thick unease. Work faltered, men glanced nervously. The land felt hostile. Sophie, Nalani, Clint observed with grim satisfaction they had proof against Mateo. The diary hinted at deeper danger. Nalani studied the brittle pages, her lore lending credence. This power, she explained gravely, tied to Hojo balance, Vasquez shattered it. Deaths, disappearances, tremors, its sickness, your presence. The conflict accelerates its awakening. Mateo is a symptom, Brody a parasite feeding on the wound. Exposing them is crucial, but caution lest we provoke catastrophic eruption. Strategy shifted, armed confrontation, risked cataclysm. They needed surgical exposure, turning paranoia and fear against Mateo and Brody. First, psychological warfare. An eerily accurate copy of the initial Brody payment note appeared on Mateo's desk. A single strand of Sophie's silver hair lay on Esperanza's false grave. Whispers seated by Clint as a disgruntled ex-hand in the saloon hinted someone had proof about the lawyer's suicide. And Brody's convenient findings, Mateo's paranoia escalated. Guards doubled movement, restricted erratic lashing out, control frayed as fear turned inward. He thrashed blindly, unsure who or what to fight. Next, leveraging allies, Sophie visited Elias Thorne again, revealing her identity, showing copies. Abandonment letter payment notes, Elias's caution cracked. "You know that murdering snake?" He spat, hardening. "He and Brody have poisoned this town long enough. Brody needs to face justice, too." He agreed to discreetly spread word among trusted townsfolk weary of living under Mateo's thumb. Hemlock, contacted via Elias, reluctantly agreed to testify about the land's history, the founder's fears, suspicious events, and Brody's questionable actions, warning again of spies. He added a chilling detail. Years back, overheard Mateo talking drunk to Brody. Something about learning how to channel the bad luck Brody egging him on, saying it might solve family problems quicker. Brody hadn't just looked away. He'd actively encouraged Mateo's darker impulses. Tension coiled, hushed groups shared rumors. Elias seated. Eyes turned to Brody, questioning loyalties, inaction, his growing wealth, his history with Mateo. Brody felt the shift pressure building. Bluster evaporated into nervous sweat, shifting eyes. He spent more time conferring privately with Mateo, their paranoia, feeding each other's the final piece, direct public confrontation. Sophie dispatched a message via anonymous Apache boy, marked with an eclipse symbol. The daughter you buried seeks justice for all your sins and your sheriff's complicity. Meet at the Mission Church. Ruins noon tomorrow. Come alone, Mateo. Your shadows won't protect you. Proof will reach beyond this valley if you fail. Mateo, cornered between fear and arrogance, convinced himself it was a bluff by rivals using superstition, amplified by Brody's increasingly nervous urgings to crush this threat now. He raged, then planned go, but lay a brutal trap. Surround the ruins, capture this ghost. Eliminate the threat, Brody assured him he'd handle security personally. Mateo summoned a dozen ruthless gunman veterans, promised bonuses. Brody quietly selected men known for loyalty to him as much as to Mateo. Sophie and Nyalani anticipated this. Apache warriors planned meticulous intervention, ensure Mateo arrived alone by subtly intercepting Brody's positioned men. Masters of unseen manipulation, next day clear, hot, unnaturally still. Town square near crumbling ruins, eerily quiet. Anxious faces watched from windows' doorways. Sheriff Brody stood near the entrance. Sweating face a mask of conflict or calculation. Mateo rode in attempting command, eyes darting nervously, visibly alone. His ambush, Brody's security, had failed. Brody's key gunmen faced bizarre delays, localized rockslide blocking access. Horses spooked into panic. Fabricated urgent messages recalling them. Mateo was isolated. Sophie stepped from the shadowed archway, bathed in unforgiving sun. Pale hair, unbound, silver halo. Luminous red eyes fixed on Mateo. Simple Apache attire, no weapon. Just the worn diary and documents. Collective gasp, La Albina, the ghost child real. Mateo drained of color, then flushed crimson. Rage, disbelief, terror, you, he choked. It cannot be. I am Esperanza, Isabella Vasquez. Sophie declared, voice clear, steady, amplified, daughter of Ricardo Vasquez and Isabella Sandoval. The child you condemned, left to die. A sharp intake of breath from Brody nearby. Lies, witchcraft, Apache tricks. Mateo blustered, fury, returning hand dropping to his Colt. A lie. Sophie held up the abandonment letter. Signed by you, your fearful relatives. Then the payment notes. A trick you paid for silence, bought a doctor, paid the sheriff. Pointed glance at Brody, who flinched visibly. Repeatedly more each time something needed smoothing over. Is it witchcraft? You forged a suicide note for a lawyer who knew too much. She met Mateo's eyes. And my father. My grandmother. My uncle. Did you arrange their accidents too, Mateo? Or just seize the chances the troubled land offered, chances perhaps whispered in your ear? Low angry murmur from unseen onlookers. Brody shifted miserably, looking trapped. Sophie continued relentlessly. Or did you learn grandfather's dark secret from this? She held up the diary, tried to use the disturbed power, feed it fear, point its hunger like a rabid dog. A quick, challenging look at Brody. Doctor, was that your idea, Sheriff, to channel the bad luck? Mateo cornered, exposed facade shattering. She was a curse, he shrieked, reverting desperate. The land rejected her, demanded cleansing. Brody knew, he said it had to be done. He fumbled, drawing his heavy revolver. She demanded nothing. Nalani stepped calmly from a side passage, flanked by a grim Elias Thorne. Fear demanded action. Greed demanded inheritance. You both demanded power, built on lies and death. Elias's voice boomed. We've lived choked by your shadows. We know about the disappearances. Brody, stand for the law now or fall with him. Brody, seeing the proof, Nalani's resolve. Elias's fury, The town's mood shifting finally made his move, but not the one expected. As Mateo leveled his Colt at Sophie, Brody didn't step forward to arrest Mateo. Instead, with surprising speed, he drew his own weapon, aiming not at Mateo, but squarely at Sophie. He's right. Brody snarled his face, shedding the mask of cowed compliance, revealing cold ambition. She is the problem messing everything up. His eyes glinted with avarice. Mateo was a fool, couldn't control it. But I learned from the old man's writings, the power's still there, waiting for the right hand. The twist hung, shocking the silence. Brody, the true manipulator, planning to eliminate both Mateo and the witness, seized the fractured empire himself, perhaps believing he could master the dark forces Mateo failed to control. But before Brody or Mateo could fire, the world ruptured. A deafening subterranean roar ripped upwards. The ground didn't tremble. It bucked, heaved violently. Deep, jagged fissures cracked open across the square, spitting plumes of acrid, greenish, sulphurous smoke. Eerie, disembodied whispers seemed to hiss from the vents. The mission bell tolled erratically, deafeningly struck by a furious, unseen hand. Blind panic erupted, screams, scrambling chunks of adobe raining down. The ground shifted treacherously. The upheaval's epicenter wasn't just under Mateo, it felt encompassing. Mateo's horse screamed terror, swallowed partially as a sinkhole opened. Pinning Mateo beneath leg, twisting audibly, Brody, staggered, momentarily stunned by the raw force, unleashed his shot, going wild. He shrieked as the ground crumbled near him, too hot steam blasting upwards. The air thickened, visibility dropping in the swirling, unnatural dust. Faint, spectral shapes seeming to coalesce and dissolve. Within the green haze, the curse, someone screamed, "It'll take us all." "It is not a curse," Nalani's powerful voice sliced through the pandemonium. "It is the land's pain, ignored, desecrated. Fed by generations of greed, blood, and foolish ambition, it demands balance." Sophie stared through the dust. Mateo pinned, pathetic. Brody's scrambling face contorted not just by fear, but by fury at losing control. Primal retribution surged. Let the earth claim them both. But Naalani's teaching held justice balance. Seeing the townsfolk's terror, knowing this power unleashed, could obliterate everything, she focused, clutching the diary, drawing instinctively on her unique resonance, the connection the land recognized. Enough. Her voice, uncanny power, pierced the chaos, addressing the roiling power beneath. "They will answer. Both will face human judgment. Your balance does not require utter destruction. Be still, Hojo." She poured her essence, her dual heritage, her link to both worlds, into the plea, demanding calm, offering respect. Slowly, reluctantly sighing, the trembling subsided, roaring, softened to groan. Then silence broken by Mateo's whimpering, Brody's ragged cursing. Mateo lay trapped, broken. Brody stood frozen, covered in dust, weapon fallen, staring at Sophie with raw terror and disbelief. The townspeople stared, trembling awe and fear in their eyes. She had faced down tyrants and the earth's wrath. Sheriff Brody, his treacherous scheme, shattered his authority. Non-existent, offered no resistance as a galvanized Elias Thorne. Deputized instantly by unspoken consensus, moved decisively with other brave townsmen, they freed Mateo, disarmed him, and then seized the utterly stunned Brody, hauling both broken men towards the jail. The reign of Vasquez terror, orchestrated by Mateo, but manipulated by Brody, ended not with defiance, but with terrified sobs, revealed treachery, and the groan of offended earth finally demanding its due. In the aftermath, the town, its relationship with the land, was irrevocably changed. Sophie's documents, Mateo's broken confession, detailing Brody's manipulation and suggestions about using the land's bad luck, and Brody's own eventual self-serving testimony painting Mateo as the sole instigator. A lie easily seen through, were undeniable. Both faced trial under territorial jurisdiction. Mateo, convicted of conspiracy accessory to multiple murders and desecration, was sentenced to life in a distant prison. Brody, convicted of conspiracy abuse, of office attempted murder, and accessory charges, received a similarly harsh sentence. His calculated treachery earning him only ruin. Their names became synonyms for hubris, greed, and betrayal. Guided by Nailani and her own justice, Sophie did not claim the Vasquez empire. In council with Apache elders and chastened town leaders like Elias, a new path emerged. Large tracts of land, particularly the sacred or disturbed areas near the well, and original displacement sites identified in the diary, were formally set aside. Guadagonalde, places left untouched. Marked by simple stone cairns, the remaining ranch lands were divided equitably or placed under communal management, breaking the cycle of corrosive power. Clearing Mateo's possessions, Sophie found the small tarnished silver locket in Isabella's former rooms. The tiny, exquisite portrait of her mother, eyes filled with familiar sadness, a precious link. Isabella's and Ricardo's true stories, cleared of Mateo's and Brody's stains, were honored before returning to the hidden canyons. Sophie, alongside Nailani and Apache elders, performed a quiet, solemn ceremony on the edge of the untouched lands. Not one of dominance, but of respect, apology, and a plea for continued peace, acknowledging the deep wounds inflicted, offering the beginning of reconciliation. Smoke from sacred herbs drifted into the desert air, carrying intentions of healing towards the watchful power beneath. Sophie did not stay her heart, remaining with Nalani and the ND, yet she became a vital bridge. Known in town for courage, wisdom, connection to the now respected land. Revered by Apache as one understanding both worlds and the earth spirits. She returned periodically, a quiet guardian, ensuring the delicate balance held her presence. A living reminder of reckoning, reconciliation, respect, justice prevailed. Truth surfaced, balance. Human and terrestrial was cautiously restored. Sophie Esperanza. Istas, the snow child, returned not as curse, but catalyst. True strength found not in vengeance, but connection. Wisdom. Courage against darkness, human and ancient. The desert forged her into protector peacemaker, leaving a legacy more enduring than stolen land or blood-stained gold. Hope from despair, resilience from abandonment, the intertwined power of spirit and earth. Her story became legend, whispered with reverence, testament to Apache wisdom. Solemn reminder, some powers demand respect above all else. The luminous red glow in her eyes, once feared now, reflected the quiet, unwavering strength of dawn breaking over the finally quieted, watchful land.